Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Caleb Royce. I'm 42 years old, and until recently I was the director of IT infrastructure at Westmere Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Chicago that thought its soul was in steel, but its brain had always been in the servers I quietly kept breathing. 11 years. That's how long I gave them. I turned their tech from digital duct tape into something real, something powerful. I built protocols that kept $80 million worth of equipment from crashing. I created systems that ran smoother than the CEO's golf swing. But none of that mattered the day Preston Langston, the very man I used to call a mentor, invited me to lunch and stabbed me between bites of filet mignon. "We're going in a different direction," he said, like he was suggesting a new wine pairing. My jaw didn't clench. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. Because I'd already seen it coming. That's the funny thing about building systems. If you know how to watch the logs, you'll always catch the rats before they chew through the wiring. What Preston didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I'd already traced the unauthorized access attempts 3 months ago, tiny footprints leading right back to the executive floor. Someone had been studying my work, poking around in files they shouldn't have even known existed. Now they were handing the keys to Nathan Langston, Preston's nephew. A 29-year-old Ivy League darling who spoke in buzzwords and had probably never spent a night in a freezing server room watching backups crawl to life. Nathan wasn't just my replacement. He was the reason I was being erased. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell my friends what had happened. I went to the lakefront, sat in the cold car with the engine off, and thought about how 7 years ago I'd crawled out of a divorce, broken and homeless, and built a kingdom out of cables and code. And now they wanted to steal it. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought wrong. I met Luis the next morning before dawn, in the corner booth of a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and old decisions. He was one of the few people I trusted, my senior systems analyst and the guy I'd handpicked from a failing startup 6 years ago. He had kids, a mortgage, and the kind of loyalty you didn't find on resumes anymore. "They're phasing me out," I said without preamble. Luis didn't even flinch. He just looked down at his chipped mug and said, "I figured. They've been asking questions. Trying to understand your architecture like they built it themselves." I nodded. "And Nathan?" "He's got full admin privileges. He's been combing through your documentation. Quietly. Like he's scared someone will notice." "They already decided weeks ago," I murmured. Luis looked up. "What's your move?" That was the moment I realized I had won. All those years of building with foresight. I never documented everything. Not the real tricks. Not the custom subroutines, the monitoring workarounds, the supplier sync bridge I coded from scratch. The company thought they had me boxed in. But I'd always kept the crown jewels just out of reach. "I'm not going to burn the place down," I said. "But I'm not handing over the blueprints to my soul either." Luis didn't smile, but he nodded. He understood. I spent the next 3 nights going through my archives. An old hard drive in the back of a filing cabinet held the original version of SyncForge, my proprietary integration interface. I'd started building it before I ever joined Westmere. I'd licensed it to them under a limited clause. Buried in my hiring contract, that clause gave me a sliver of legal leverage. And now that sliver would become my sword. But leverage wasn't enough. What I needed was control. By the end of the week, the announcement hit during the all-hands meeting. Preston stood on stage like some benevolent dictator, giving me a 5-minute eulogy while Nathan stood next to him like a prince inheriting land he didn't cultivate. "Caleb Royce has been instrumental in transforming Westmere's technical backbone," Preston said. "We thank him as he supports us during this exciting leadership transition." Applause. Polite. Shallow. Forced. My team looked shocked. Vanessa, my operations lead, met my gaze from across the room. I gave her the smallest of nods. Afterward, I met with HR and legal. They slid documents across the table, citing clauses and confidentiality. I pointed out the line in my contract about pre-existing intellectual property. Diane from HR frowned. Preston said, "Let's not make this complicated." "Oh, I'm not," I replied. "Just honest." They didn't know about the external backup server Luis and I were building, or the off-site copy of my original code that would remain untouched, protected, and fully mine. They also didn't know about the digital heartbeat embedded into every instance of SyncForge. A single verification check, set to expire precisely 8 days after my final paycheck. Tick. Tock. That weekend, I met with Darren Phillips, a network security specialist I used to work with before Westmere. We met in an old diner across town, the kind of place where no one cared who you were as long as you tipped in cash. They're selling, aren't they? I asked. Darren blinked. What? Westmere. The whole company. That's why the sudden push. The timing's too clean. He leaned back thinking. Let me dig. 2 nights later, Darren called me at midnight. You were right, he said. TechCore Manufacturing is acquiring them. The deal's been in motion for months. And your system, SyncForge, is listed as a key asset in the valuation. Pause. Then, they're selling you, Caleb. And they didn't even have the decency to tell you. I hung up, sat in the dark, and stared at the blinking cursor on my terminal screen. They weren't just replacing me. They were profiting off me. Off my silence. I wasn't going to stay silent. Back at the office on Monday, Nathan tried to run a team meeting. He fumbled through half-baked suggestions about modernizing the network stack. When I pushed back, politely, always politely, he bristled like a dog denied a treat. Vanessa defended me. Publicly. Which meant she had just unknowingly made herself a target. Afterward, she pulled me aside. He's threatened by you. I shook my head. No. He's threatened by competence. She laughed. Then looked scared. And that's when I realized, Nathan wasn't here to lead. He was here to replace everyone loyal to me. One by one. The email came the next day. Legal asserting full ownership of SyncForge. A $5,000 technology acquisition bonus, as a pathetic payoff for 11 years of work. I almost laughed. Then I sent a quiet text to Luis. Plan B, time to move. Luis handed me the flash drive in the parking lot of a Jewel Osco, under the flickering glow of a half-dead streetlight. Everything you asked for, he said, his voice low. Original code bases, deployment logs, authentication keys. It's all on there. I took the drive and held it for a moment before sliding it into my coat pocket. You sure about this? Luis looked me dead in the eye. They think we're all replaceable. They need to learn they're not invincible. I nodded, but inside I felt something deeper than vengeance. Something quieter. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about ownership, of my work, of my worth, of the years I gave to a company that never meant to give anything back. The next day, I filed provisional patents for the most critical components of SyncForge. Not the full system, that would take too long to process and defend, but the foundational elements that made it integrate seamlessly with Westmere's hardware. The parts they couldn't live without. Then I sent an email to Preston and HR, referencing the licensing clause in my original contract and the pre-employment development logs I'd recently rediscovered. They didn't reply. Instead, I was locked out of the internal development server within 2 hours. Typical. Nathan called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. He tried to smile through his irritation. Caleb, glad you could join. We were just reviewing some changes to the SyncForge architecture. I stood silently by the whiteboard, watching him explain protocols he didn't understand, confidently misquoting code logic like a magician bluffing his way through a disappearing act. They're not workarounds, Vanessa said from across the room. They're safeguards. And Caleb designed them after the 2018 sync failure. You remember what that cost us, right? The room went quiet. Nathan's smirk faltered. We'll take that under advisement. He didn't speak to me again for the rest of the meeting. That night I met Darren again. This time he handed me something more dangerous than code. Information. They're accelerating the acquisition, he said. TechCore wants full operational stability by the end of the quarter. That means your system, SyncForge, needs to look flawless on paper. No bugs, no mysteries, no licensing issues. Then I've got leverage, I said. He nodded. The good kind. And Nathan? I asked. Darren hesitated. He's connected. But not bulletproof. I went home and stayed up until 4 a.m. setting up an isolated off-site server with Darren's help. Then I uploaded my personal standalone version of SyncForge, untouched, unmodified, and completely detached from anything Westmere had touched. It was mine. And I planned to prove it. Wednesday morning, a meeting invite popped into my inbox from TechCore's VP of Operations. I hadn't contacted them directly. Someone from the inside must have passed along my name. Curious to hear your story, the email read. And your side of the system integration conversation. I read it 3 times before replying. Happy to meet. Let's talk after my departure date. Let them stew in uncertainty a little longer. That night I made the final move. Using the access keys Luis had preserved, I modified SyncForge's licensing protocol across all Westmere instances. Nothing malicious. No corruption. Just a silent trigger that would deactivate functionality exactly 8 days after my official exit date. The system wouldn't delete anything. It wouldn't crash. It would simply stop and display one polite message. License expired. Please contact the developer to renew. Thursday, Nathan called me into his office. Some of the team say you've been acting odd, he said. Anything I should know about? Just wrapping things up, I replied with a blank expression. Wouldn't want the handoff to be incomplete. He eyed me. We're changing all passwords and admin credentials tomorrow. Smart, I said. Best practice. I left him there paranoid but unsure why. I didn't need to lift a finger anymore. The wheels were already in motion. Friday. My last day. I turned in my badge, signed the exit paperwork, and declined the goodbye lunch Nathan had awkwardly arranged, likely just for optics. Preston didn't even look me in the eye when I passed him in the hallway. 11 years. Reduced to a glance. Luis texted me at 9 p.m. They changed the passwords. We're locked out now. Perfect. I slept better that night than I had in a year. Monday morning, 9:17 a.m. Westmere's production floors surged into peak load. And then, everything stopped. Every screen linked to SyncForge displayed the same message. License expired. Please contact the developer to renew. By 9:45, all 3 facilities were offline. Preston called at 10:31 a.m., his voice cracking behind forced calm. What the hell did you do? I smiled, sipping my coffee slowly. The license expired. This is sabotage. No, I replied. It's called license management. Check clause 7 of my integration agreement from 11 years ago. You never purchased the system, you leased it. Silence. I've sent your legal team a new licensing agreement. It includes proper compensation, acknowledgement of my ownership, and a mutual non-disclosure clause. You're blackmailing us. I shrugged even though he couldn't see me. That's business, Preston. These things happen. By 3 p.m., Westmere's legal team had reviewed the licensing documents I'd sent. By 5 p.m. they signed the agreement. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. Because I wasn't done yet. This wasn't about making them pay once. This was about making sure they never forgot what it cost to discard someone who built everything they depended on. 2 days later, I sat across from the vice president of operations at TechCore Industries in their sleek, glass-walled downtown office. He didn't waste time with small talk. We're still acquiring Westmere, he said. But we want you to oversee the technical integration. Not as an employee, I replied. He nodded. Of course. You'll be brought in as a lead consultant. Full autonomy. Twice your previous salary. We want your systems, but more importantly we want you. I flipped through the contract. It was all there, 6-month retainer, independent contractor status, and total freedom to choose my team. Then I asked the question I'd been waiting for. What about Nathan Langston? The VP's mouth tightened into a line. He'll be transitioning out. We've already had several major clients threaten to pull contracts over repeated system failures under his watch. I nodded once. I'll take the deal. 3 weeks later, Nathan was quietly removed from his role. The official story was that he'd pursued other opportunities. But inside Westmere's crumbling shell, everyone knew the truth. He'd been handed a kingdom. And fumbled it into the dirt. Luis called to tell me the team had scattered. Half of them didn't trust management anymore. Vanessa had submitted her resignation. So had 2 of the senior developers. I told her to call you, Luis said. She already did, I said. She starts next month. That was the real win, not the money, not the contract. The people. The ones who stayed up late with me to debug broken loops. The ones who never saw their names in quarterly reports, but made sure the lights stayed on. I wasn't going to let them get swept under the rug with me. I built something better. The consulting firm I launched was small, quiet. Just 5 of us at first, me, Vanessa, Luis, and 2 others from the old team. We operated from a rented loft above a bookstore. No corner offices. No glass-walled conference rooms. Just code, coffee, and control. For the first time in over a decade, I worked for something again, not just under someone. I ran into Preston 6 months later at a restaurant downtown. He was alone, sitting at a bar nursing a scotch. His suit was pressed but limp, like it had been worn one time too many. He saw me and flinched, just for a moment, before forcing a brittle smile and approaching. You won, he said quietly. I looked him over. He had aged. The lines around his eyes had deepened. The weight of loss clung to him. It wasn't about winning, I replied. It was about knowing what I was worth. He nodded once. Then he walked away. That was the last time I saw him. The week after that, TechCore flew me to Boston to begin system integrations across 3 of their subsidiaries. They asked if I'd consider taking on a long-term CTO position. I turned them down. I had no interest in board meetings or title inflation. I had tasted freedom, and it was the first honest thing I'd had in years. The truth is, revenge doesn't always explode like fireworks. Sometimes it burns slow, like a fuse under polished floors, like dignity restored one decision at a time. And in that silence, in that reclamation, there's power. 2 weeks after signing with TechCore, I received a secure email from one of Westmere's former clients, an international logistics firm that had relied heavily on SyncForge to manage real-time inventory synchronization across their global warehouses. The message was short. We've been informed of recent instability. Are you still involved in the platform's development? We'd like to talk soon. I scheduled a call the next morning. 10 minutes in, they offered to cancel their Westmere contract entirely if I could provide an independent, stable version of the SyncForge framework. I didn't even have to think about it. The work had already begun. By the end of the month, 3 more former clients reached out. Word had spread fast. Nathan's modernization was failing. The plug-and-play methods he tried to install couldn't adapt to the specialized machinery, and the simplified protocols he bragged about had triggered 2 regional shutdowns. Millions lost. And growing. TechCore had kept him in place just long enough to watch him sink. Quietly, internally, they made the call. Nathan Langston was done. The man who replaced me without blinking was now unemployed, his LinkedIn last updated on the day I left Westmere. I'd be lying if I said I didn't check it. More than once. Meanwhile, my consulting firm, Royce Logic, grew faster than I could manage. I brought Vanessa on as operations director. Luis became lead systems architect. We opened a second office by Q3, hired 6 new engineers, and landed a multi-million-dollar contract with a medical manufacturing firm that needed a SyncForge-style infrastructure from scratch. Only this time there would be no licensing confusion. No ownership gray areas. Every line of code bore my name, our name. Ours. Late one evening, I stood in my new server room, modest, cool, humming with quiet purpose. I thought about the first server cabinet I'd built at Westmere. The way my hands trembled as I loaded in the last of the blades during that first overhaul, terrified something would fail. 11 years later, I wasn't afraid anymore. Because I'd been broken, humiliated, erased, and I'd taken every shattered piece and built something stronger. That weekend I received a letter. An actual letter. Handwritten. No return address. Kelp. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know the full story until after you were gone. I thought you were just another arrogant tech guy guarding his turf. But I've seen the fallout. I've seen what you built and what they broke. You deserved better. Vanessa. I smiled and pinned the note above my desk. Then I went back to work. The calls from Westmere never came directly. They wouldn't. But I heard through TechCore that their internal systems team had been fully replaced. Preston had been reassigned to a non-operational, executive liaison role. The title was shiny, the office windowed, but he didn't make decisions anymore. He sat in meetings and nodded along. While the guy they fired over a stake, now consulted directly with the people who bought them. That's not irony. That's systemic justice. People always assume revenge is loud, explosive. But that's not always true. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is building something better after they've taken everything from you, so much better that they have no choice but to acknowledge it, even if they never say a word. Sometimes, the best revenge is being necessary again. It was early October when I got the invitation. A high-level industry conference in Boston, sponsored by TechCore and several other manufacturing giants. A showcase of emerging technology leadership. They wanted me to sit on a panel about legacy system innovation. And listed just beneath my name on the flyer was Preston Langston, keynote moderator. I read it 3 times, then laughed, actually laughed, because poetic justice doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes, it wears a stiff blazer and has to introduce the man it once fired in front of a ballroom full of investors. I accepted. When I arrived at the event, Preston was already at the check-in table. He looked up as I approached. For a split second, the old confidence kicked in. His smile automatic, his hand extending as if nothing had ever gone wrong between us. Caleb, he said. Good to see you. I shook his hand but didn't offer a smile. You look well, he added, voice strained. Consulting agrees with me, I said. He nodded, that twitchy kind of nod people do when they're not sure what else to say. A lot of changes lately. I said. Transitions can be hard. Especially when the foundation wasn't as solid as everyone thought. His eyes flickered. Then he moved on, calling out to another guest with too much enthusiasm. The man who once fired me without blinking now introduced me on stage in front of 500 professionals as a thought leader in enterprise tech. I stood behind the podium, looked out at the crowd, then back at him, where he sat stiffly in the moderator's chair. And then I opened with this. 11 years ago, I designed a system I thought would live inside one company. But it turns out, when people try to bury something powerful, something resilient, it finds a way to grow somewhere else. That's the thing about roots. You can't always see them until you trip. The audience laughed politely. Preston didn't laugh at all. Back in Chicago, Royce logic had grown beyond me. Vanessa was managing client accounts with surgical precision. Luis had just led a successful integration with one of TechCore's newer acquisitions. The younger engineers called him the architect. And every few weeks, another ex-Westmere client called, asking if we had bandwidth. We didn't, but we made room. One night, while walking the lakefront trail I used to visit when I felt hopeless, I saw the city lights reflected in the water and remembered the first week after my firing, the sleepless nights, the nausea of betrayal, the way I couldn't stop replaying Preston's voice in my head. Now the only voice I heard was my own. Confident. Focused. Calm. I sat on a bench and pulled out my phone. One new email. It was from Nathan Langston. I guess congratulations are in order. Things didn't go the way I thought they would. I was young. Thought I could shortcut what you built. I didn't respect it, or you. You were right to protect your work. If you're ever hiring, I could use a fresh start. No hard feelings either way. Nathan. I stared at the screen. Thought about the mess he'd left. The arrogance. The dismissal. The disrespect. Then I hit delete. No reply. Some people don't deserve a second chance. Some lessons have to leave a scar. The next morning I called a real estate agent. I wanted a space of my own. Not just for the company. For me. A quiet cabin on the outskirts of Madison. Big trees. A lake. A porch where I could sit with a coffee and know without a doubt that every nail, every screw, every server that now hummed with life in our offices was something they could never take from me again. Because I no longer needed their titles. I had built my own name. And this time it was permanent. Friday morning. Exactly 1 year to the day since Preston Langston fired me over lunch at Maxwell's. I woke up in the cabin I'd bought with the first consulting check TechCore issued. Brewed coffee from beans Luis had brought back from Colombia on his honeymoon. Sat on the porch and watched the sun rise over a quiet lake. I felt it, not triumph, not vengeance. Closure. A different kind of silence now. One not forced by corporate betrayal, but chosen. Then my phone vibrated. An email. From a name I didn't recognize, someone in TechCore's legal division. Mr. Royce, we've recently reviewed Westmere's historical integration files for compliance documentation. Your original licensing contract is now being cited as precedent for several legacy system disputes across our subsidiaries. Would you be open to consulting on future integration policy development? That's how far the echo had traveled. The system they tried to steal had become the blueprint for a much bigger empire. Only now I own the rights. And the name. And the future. That afternoon I met with Vanessa and Luis in our new headquarters. A clean, minimalist building in River North, full of glass, wood and the soft hum of focused minds. I handed Vanessa a signed contract from TechCore for a 6-month policy oversight retainer. You're officially running our new compliance integration division, I told her. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? As a rootkit in a firewall. Luis laughed. Later that day one of our new interns asked me, why didn't you sue them? You had so much leverage. I smiled, leaned back in my chair and answered honestly. Because I didn't need to destroy them to win. I just needed to let them collapse under the weight of what they stole. Preston's downfall wasn't dramatic. It didn't end in handcuffs or public scandal. It ended in irrelevance. He kept his office and his title for a while. But no one called on him to make decisions. No one asked for his input on real strategy. He became the man in the room no one turned to, the final punishment for someone who once thought he could erase value without consequence. Nathan? Last I heard he was trying to launch a startup. It failed. Twice. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Vanessa hung a framed photo in our office break room, a picture of the original server room back at Westmere. Below it she added a plaque. Some systems can't be replaced. Some people shouldn't be. I never asked her to do it. But I was glad she did. Sometimes when I look back, I wonder what would have happened if Preston had treated me with respect. If he'd offered a real transition. If Nathan had walked into that server room with humility instead of hubris. Maybe things could have gone differently. But then again, maybe I wouldn't have discovered what I was capable of. Because the truth is, I was never just the system guy. I was the architect. And when they gave me a deadline, I gave them an expiration date. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.